Hi, welcome to this introductory presentation that will cover how Tivoli Storage Manager works with N Series and NAS devices. I'm going to be covering how Tivoli Storage Manager backs up and archives the data that resides on NAS devices. We'll look at the three different options, those being doing a CIFS or NFS backup, if it's an N Series or NetAPP device using SnapDiff or SnapMirror To Tape, and finally, utilizing NDMP protocol to do backups. We'll also take a look at how NAS devices can be used in Tivoli Storage Manager's storage hierarchy, both in the capacity of just being another storage pool that's used to save backups and archives. We'll also see how it fits into FlashCopy Manager and how it can be utilized with System Storage Archive Manager. So let's first of all take a look at protecting data on a NAS device via a CIFS or NFS access. This is probably not the best case scenario because of the massive amounts of data that usually reside on NAS devices. The amount of time that it takes to go through and scan the different file systems and look for changes might make for a slow backup. You would be able to have file level granularity utilizing progressive incremental backups and going directly to the Tivoli Storage Manager server, either over the SAN or the WAN or LAN, backing up the data into our large number of supported devices. The downside of this, however, is the file access overhead to go through and scan the different file systems looking for changed files, and then sending those large amount of files across the network to the Tivoli Storage Manager. Let's take a look how, if you're utilizing a N Series or NetAPP device, how we can use the NetAPP SnapDiff capability to do a very efficient backup of the information residing on those N Series or NetAPP devices. The NetAPP SnapDiff is a incremental backup that only works with the IBM N Series or the NetAPP filers. The nice thing about the SnapDiff functionality is we don't have to go through and scan the entire filer to determine which files have changed since the last backup. Instead, we're using a combination of persistent change logs and snapshots to determine what's changed since the last backup. So the end result is that we'll get faster backups and restores will be at the file level. The way that SnapDiff works on N-Series devices is that the first time you back something up, a snapshot is created out on the N-Series device, and then TSM goes into this via the API and actually backs up the individual files in that snapshot. We also record the name of the snapshot that we backed these up from. This is important because the next time we go to do an incremental backup, TSM will once again request that the N-Series creates a snapshot. It'll then take this new snapshot and compare it to the original snapshot to figure out which files have changed. We'll then back up those individual files and just those changed files to the Tivoli Storage Manager server. So basically what we've done is we've used the snapshot technology to figure out what has changed, and therefore we've expedited the amount of time it takes to process a backup. We are still backing up at a file level. All that the snapshots do is give us the capability to easily determine which files have changed. The way that this is kicked off is either through a schedule, or you can go into the TSM Backup Archive GUI and kick off with the incremental snapshot option. And you would do this for each of the file systems residing out on that N Series or NetAPP device. So SnapDiff did a file level backup. There are cases where you've got an extremely large N Series or NetAPP device, or you would prefer to have an image level backup. So in this case, you would use SnapMirror To Tape, also called SMT2. The SnapMirror To Tape is excellent because it will take a image level backup, which obviously is going to be faster than a file level backup. However, when it comes to do a restore, it's also only at the image level. We're not restoring individual files from this image level backup. When we create the image level backup, it is written to tape, and it's written block by block as a copy of the original file system. We do take into account the disk geometry. Therefore, when you go do a restore, it'll be fastest to restore to a volume that has similar geometry. However, unlike geometry, is still supported. Once again, this SnapMirror to Tape is only supported on our NetAPP and IBM N Series file servers. The way that you would execute a SnapMirror to Tape is via the TSM administrator command line. Likewise, that's how you would go about doing a retrieve of that SnapMirror to Tape if you wanted to restore it. So we just talked about two capabilities if you have N Series or NetAPP device. This would be the SnapDiff, which does a file level backup, or the SnapMirror, which does a volume level backup. Now let's take a look at how NDMP works with Tivoli Storage Manager. First of all, what is NDMP? NDMP is a network data management protocol. It is a protocol that was invented by NetAPP and Legato, and it was invented to transport data between NAS devices and backup devices. And we utilize this in two different ways. We can either have the NAS filer back up directly to a attached tape device, or we can have the NAS filer send the information back across the network out through the Tivoli Storage Manager server out to our own storage hierarchy. Either way, Tivoli Storage Manager still utilizes our administrator authorities, our policy management. We can still utilize the libraries and drives that we have defined underneath Tivoli Storage Manager, and we continue to do quite a bit of our tape management. So let's look at the first scenario for how we would back up a NAS device using NDMP. In this case, we have the NAS file systems, and the NAS filer has a tape library attached to it. Now, this library could also be shared with Tivoli Storage Manager, or it could just be dedicated to that NAS filer. The Tivoli Storage Manager client will kick off the request to do an NDMP backup. This might be an on-demand request, or it might be a scheduled request. So the Tivoli Storage Manager server accepts this request to do a backup. It then takes the backup and restore commands that are needed and sends them over the network to the NAS filer. At this point, the NAS filer accepts the backup commands and then performs the required tape or library options like mounting the tapes, positioning the tapes, and writing out to the tapes. It'll go ahead and it'll do its backup, and then it'll send metadata back to the Tivoli Storage Manager, telling about what it backed up and on which tape and so forth. In this scenario 1, the data flows directly from the NAS filer out to the tape library. It does not go across the LAN, the WAN, or the SAN. Only meta information is flowing between the NAS filer and the TSM server. With this scenario, if you had NAS devices at remote locations, and if those NAS devices also had tape libraries attached to them, you could utilize this NDMP backup where TSM server tells the NAS devices to back up directly to the tape libraries that are attached at those remote sites. So in this case, it's very clean because you're not having to send data across the WAN back to the TSM server. Our second scenario with Tivoli Storage Manager, we still have the TSM client kicking off the backup, and the TSM server still sends out the request to do the backup out to the filer. But in this case, the filer sends its data back across the network through the TSM server, and then the TSM server writes it out to our storage hierarchy. And this could be any type of storage we support, whether it's disk, whether it's some type of VTL, whether it's tape. In this scenario, you have the benefit that you have additional storage supported as the backend to where you're doing your backups to. The downside is that you do have to send the data across the network and through the TSM server, so you're going to have extra network traffic and you're going to have extra overhead on the TSM server. If you had NAS devices at remote locations and were utilizing the second scenario, your remote sites would have to send the data back across the network to the TSM server. So you'd have to have a pretty big network between those data centers and remote sites to support this backup configuration. So regardless if you're using scenario 1 or scenario 2, Tivoli Storage Manager, when it utilizes NDMP, is going to create a high-performance, scalable backup of your NAS devices. These are going to be full file systems or directory tree images We can then do a differential file system or directory tree image in conjunction with that full backup. When we go to do the restore, we can either do the restore of the full file systems or directory tree images, or the fulls plus the differential images. You can also go in and select files and or directories to restore directly. You are able to do parallel backups and restore options. We would be limited by the number of parallel sessions that an NDMP protocol would support. We can also utilize direct access recovery as well as a table of contents when we're doing the restores, and I'll explain those in more detail. When it comes to doing the NDMP backups, the tape libraries can either be dedicated to that NAS filer or they could be shared by Tivoli Storage Manager. All of the images we're backing up, TSM will assign those to policies and we will manage them with those policies. We can access and utilize our administrator command line, our Windows AIX or Sun Backup Archive clients, as well as web interfaces to do these backups and restores. You can schedule the NDMP backups either through the TSM scheduler or through some type of third-party scheduler. We do support different types of languages utilizing NDMP. It will correctly show the international characters. Remember, NDMP is doing a full backup with associated differentials. It is not doing a progressive incremental backup. This is because we use the NDMP protocol, and the NDMP protocol is based upon the full plus differential methodology. If you try to do a differential and the full backup does not exist, it will force you to do a full backup at that point. Inside of the Tivoli Storage Manager server, we do track the full and the associated differentials together, so we don't expire off a full backup until all of the differential backups associated with it are ready for expiration. When you go to do a restore, if you're restoring a differential backup, we first restore the full backup image and then we'll restore the differential on top of that. Tivoli Storage Manager does provide the option to collect information about the individual files and create this table of contents. This table of contents will be stored in a location specified by the TSM policy. Usually we recommend some type of disk storage on the TSM server. And what happens is during the backup, this table of contents is written out. Now, if a customer wants to do a restore and utilize a table of contents, this table of contents will be loaded into the TSM database, and then the TSM clients will be able to see the individual files and choose them directly from there. Once the table of contents has been loaded into the TSM server database, we'll keep it there so that it can be used by another web client session if that web client session needs the same table of contents data. And then after the timeout period for that, we'll simply flush it out of our database and free up the space. So this is what a table of contents backup and restore would look like. When the TSM client requests the backup, the TSM server initiates the backup with the NAS device. The NAS will send the meta information back to the TSM server while it writes out the data directly to tape, assuming this is scenario 1. And the TSM server will then take that meta information and create a table of contents that's written out to the disk storage or wherever you assigned it to be saved to. When it's time to do a restore, the TSM server will first of all go out and locate the table of contents and load it into its TSM DB2 database. The TSM client will then be able to see the information about the individual files and issue a request for a specific file. At that point, the TSM server will work with the NAS device to request that restoration take place from the tape that it was written to. And this is where the concept of a direct access recovery comes into play. When the files are written out, TSM stores position information and other metadata information in the table of contents. So when it goes to do the restore, it can more rapidly access where on tape this file is. Okay, so what we just talked about was utilizing NDMP to do backups. Basically, we have two options with NDMP. One, we can have the NAS filer back up directly to a attached tape drive, or we can have the backups go back across the network through the TSM server and out to the TSM storage hierarchy. The advantages of it going directly to tape are obviously it's faster and there's less network traffic. The downside is you have less supported devices. The advantage of sending the data back across the network to the TSM server is that you have more storage devices to write to. However, the disadvantage is you will send the data across the network and through the TSM server, so you have additional network and TSM server processing. The NDMP backup is a full plus differential backup, and you can have the option of doing a table of contents if you want to be able to more rapidly access individual files. FlashCopy Manager can utilize NAS devices as a way to rapidly create snapshots of application data or file server data or virtual data. The way the FlashCopy Manager works is it takes the data that's residing on these intelligent disk subsystems and it creates a rapid snapshot of those volumes. TSM then takes those volumes, does its backup from those copies. The advantages of this being that your production data does not have additional backup overhead on it. Instead, the backups are being done from the snapshots. Also, when it comes to restores, you have the advantage that you can restore either directly from snapshots or from data that's residing out in the Tivoli Storage Manager server. So the way that N Series devices fit into the FlashCopy Manager is they can be one of the intelligent disk subsystems that we utilize to create snapshots and do the backups from. Let's take a look at how NAS devices can also be used in archive management. A Tivoli Storage Manager server can be dedicated to become an archive retention server. This is called our System Storage Archive Manager. It does require a dedicated TSM server, and underneath those TSM servers we could utilize the NAS devices and their SnapLock capability to provide a disk-based data permanence solution for regulated and referenced data. So what the N Series device gives us in this case is worm disk devices working in conjunction with our System Storage Archive Manager's archive capability. So what we just talked about was how Tivoli Storage Manager can protect NAS devices and how Tivoli Storage Manager can use NAS devices to store data in our storage hierarchy. Please take the time to see some of our other videos that have to do with TSM and NAS, as well as some of the other great features in Tivoli Storage Manager. Thank you.